Hi, this is Ted Price from Insomniac Games, and today I had the great pleasure of talking to Greg Street, who is the VP of IP and Entertainment for Riot Games. What's particularly exciting about today's conversation is that Greg spent time explaining Riot's decision to take its League of Legends IP and blast it out into multiple different genres of games. It's something that has taken the game world by surprise and has gotten gamers really, really excited. Greg also shares his experience leading design teams and describes the qualities that he finds important in designers. He also talks about how communication is absolutely crucial when it comes to large design teams who are working on either one singular project or multiple projects, and how key it is to share both wins and losses. Greg also shares his experience working with players and how to take their feedback and make it applicable to the design process. And finally, if you're a designer or a storyteller and you want to get into the industry, or let's say you're in the industry and you want to improve how you do things, Greg has some fantastic advice for you.
Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
Greg, thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, excited to be here. This will be cool.
Yeah. Well, one thing that happened recently, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that your title changed. And you're the VP of IP and Entertainment at Riot. So, and correct, your title did change, right? You actually...
Yeah, we were kind of waiting on that. We were scared if we made too big a deal about entertainment, it might tip our hand about the kinds of things we were going to announce.
Right. Well, so that is one of the more unique titles I've heard in games. Seriously, I've never heard that title before in our industry. So tell me a little bit more about what it really means.
I think of my job as a couple different things. One is we have this IP that up until a couple days ago had been expressed in one game. It was a really popular IP just by virtue of the fact that the game's 10 years old. We have a lot of players, but we had never done much with it aside from kind of the, one-off music video and that sort of thing. And we knew we were about to launch a lot more games in the IP. And so we had to figure out a way to collaborate together within this shared space. Like a lot of gaming IPs, this one did not evolve from the mind of like one creator, right? There's no J.K. Rowling who you can go ask, like, what did you mean exactly when you said this? Often people have their own interpretation of events or characters or the way the world really works. I dealt with that a little bit at Blizzard when we were on World of Warcraft. Like, all right, we need new content. What threads could we pull on that we haven't used yet before? And so just from a strategic level, we wanted a way that we could all collaborate together within this shared IP. And so my boss, Nicola Laurent, the head of Riot now, asked me to kind of be the air traffic controller for all of these different ideas to make sure that the world kind of, stayed somewhat consistent. It's a game world. It's never going to be super consistent. But literally at one point, our character Lux, we had 3 different teams name her mom something different, like different personality, different human, like they were not compatible. And so trying to prevent that kind of stuff that ultimately might disappoint players or make us look amateurish.
So are you reviewing every single concept, every single story idea that comes up around these new sort of branches for Riot?
Yeah, actually, no, that would be, that would slow everyone down way too much. Instead, we spent a lot of time kind of getting aligned at the high level, like what's the tone of our universe? What are the kind of immutable aspects of these characters, if any? And then what are the things that are more flexible? And then we just have a process for resolving conflict when it comes up. But for the most part, what we really want is for the different teams to be able to go make the stuff they need as fast as they need to make it and make sure it, meets the product needs of their individual game without, screwing up the brand of League overall or making something that players will say like, wait, that's not who that character is.
Well, let's talk about tone. That's a great term, right? Yeah. And sometimes it's very difficult to define. So if you had to concisely define the tone that exists now across all of your new efforts, what would it be?
So we have a term for this because we've been thinking about this kind of thing a lot lately. The description we like is pop fantasy.
Okay.
And we use that really deliberately. If you kind of go back in time, Lord of the Rings is kind of like high fantasy, followed by Game of Thrones, which is very grim fantasy. And we like the pop fantasy because it kind of implies a mashup of genres, which is something we do. It's a little lighthearted. Like, we want to have real stakes in the story, but we also don't want to take ourselves too seriously. So that's kind of what we centered on as a way of giving people a rough idea of where to go. And not just internally, but when we work with partners or licensing or anything like that, we kind of want them to understand what League means.
So how do you determine when something is just funny enough?
Oh, this is a big pet peeve of mine. Not that I don't have a good sense of humor, but it's really easy to take the cute and the funny way too far because you get a good reaction from players out of it. And then it's really easy to like say, oh, they really like that. Let's like triple down on it and make everyone sick of it. A little of that goes a long way. And sometimes when you're telling teams, hey, maybe you should back off just a little bit, they're like, but players love this stuff. That's a hard one.
Is there some definition of humor that you guys use? And I only ask this because at Insomniac, we have the same challenge.
Yeah.
When you have to define what humor is for your title or your franchise, it's such a squishy thing.
Yeah, for sure. We don't have a great definition of it. That makes me think that's something we're probably going to want to work out ahead of time. Overall, I think it needs to be authentic to the universe. We'll break down the fourth wall sometimes. We'll throw in the occasional pop culture, aside every now and then, but it should kind of be on the perimeter, not too core to the universe. Or I think it's hard for people to take the world seriously if the characters are kind of like always mocking themselves in the world. Well,
it seems to me that over the years you have refined it. As your characters have gotten more consistent in terms of the design and the backstories, it seems like everything has sort of been moving more close together for a more unified voice.
Good. I mean
that's my perception watching from the outside.
If you go back and look at our original 40 or so characters, we kind of cribbed heavily. Like, we weren't very confident in our creativity. I mean, I say we, this was long before I was here, but there's some somewhat generic characters or some characters that resemble other IPs a little too much. Over time, we've refined those and kind of tried to give them their own voice and make them feel like they belong to this universe.
Well, one thing you have mentioned that maybe our listeners aren't quite aware of is that a few days ago, you made one of the biggest announcements in Riot history.
Yeah.
Just all of a sudden sharing a multitude of new directions that the Riot IP can move in. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that was received?
Yeah. I mean, it was a fun problem for us to try to solve in that Riot had one game for 10 years. And people kind of knew that we're working on other games. And we knew that, one of the things we announced was a card game. We knew if after 7 years we said, hey, we finally have our second game, but it's a card game, maybe the reaction wouldn't be what we wanted.
You know what? As a Hearthstone fanatic and watching the Twitch stream about your card game, I got really excited.
Awesome. So maybe it landed fine. But the strategy we ultimately came up with was, let's just announce everything at once. That way, even if someone's disappointed that we didn't announce, say, an open world RPG, they'd at least say, oh, but Riot's going to play in a lot of genres, so hopefully one day they'll make, my game. And so we wrapped that all up as part of the, just so happened that this was the 10th anniversary of League of Legends. So we wrapped that all up as it's League's 10th anniversary. We want to kind of give a big present to players. And as part of that, we'll give them a peek behind the curtain of all the stuff that's coming up next. So we announced a few new games, and we've announced our first animated TV show.
Which looked beautiful.
Awesome.
What a great trailer. And it got me really excited. I mean, especially since TV has really been elevating itself through lots of great storytelling. Seeing games now move into that space and I think compete head to head with the stuff you see on Netflix or Amazon Prime or any of the other big channels is cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
and there's so much material you guys can draw from.
Way too much material. Yeah. 150 some characters. Yeah. Movies are great and we're huge fans of cinema, but you generally have a couple of hours to tell a story.
Right.
And TV has kind of the quote unquote luxury of being able to slow down a little bit, have more intimate moments because time isn't quite as precious. It's still pretty precious. So
do you think that this will be a vanguard for other IP related shows?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the goal. This is a big commitment to be in the space.
Yeah.
This is the first show in that world. Now, obviously, if it flops, if players don't like it, we'll pivot our strategy. But the plan is to do a lot of this kind of thing.
I think it's exciting. I mean, I hope other game developers follow suit because it seems like we've always talked about broadening our IP reach, and it's been challenging to break into the mainstream media.
Yeah, it is. I mean, as game developers, we don't always know the right way to cross over into different media. There's certainly been a lot of attempts that, maybe with good intentions didn't hit the quality bar they were ultimately going for. We're really kind of paranoid about creating something that might embarrass our players. What we really want is something that players can say, hey, I know you don't play League, but this is why I love this world so much, and this might be something that you're interested in, even if you're never going to, jump online and play a competitive game.
Well, how did you manage to gain internal confidence that you guys would be able to tell a story that's right for TV versus games, and really, but also remain true to the characters? Because I know there are a lot of studios who have failed miserably at least moving towards the movies, not necessarily towards TV shows. Mm-hmm. What did you do to make sure that it was being done right?
We're very patient, probably too patient sometimes. And so we built that confidence up slowly. We started with our music videos. You go back to something like Get Jinxed, has some of the same, partner, this animation studio in Paris called Fortiche helped us to animate that. Some of the same characters and settings, frankly, that the TV show Arcane is going to take place in. And then every Worlds, we like to hopefully excite players with a new video. We kick off each competitive season of League of Legends with a new video. And so we had gotten some practice telling stories, kind of figuring out, what's the right camera angle, whose point of view are we at, how much action can you cram into a few seconds, and thought, based on that, let's try to go a little bigger and a little bigger. I mean, the show's been in development for a long time. It's not like we, did it last year or something, and it's been super painful, but we've learned a lot along the way. Is
everything being done in-house for the show now?
Yeah. I mean, we didn't want to hand over the car keys to anyone else and be like, please don't hurt our baby. So we made this one completely in-house.
That's impressive.
Yeah, all the writing. I mean, we've hired some people with expertise from Hollywood and other industries, but it's all done in-house.
That's wow. Well, I'm excited for that.
It's ambitious.
Have you announced much about the dates yet?
No, we haven't. And the reason, I mean, we committed to 2020 and hopefully that sticks, but we don't have a distribution partner because we wanted to own all the creative ourselves. We wanted to own the finances ourselves, and we wanted to be able to communicate it directly to players without kind of anyone being a middleman in the way. So now that it's out, now that players have seen it, we're ready to go to partners and say like, hey, we're ready to put this out. Do you want to go with us?
What kind of strategy do you think about there? I mean, you could go directly to YouTube if you wanted to, but is it better for you to have a more mainstream partner for distribution?
I think so. It also really helps. Like one of the awesome things about League of Legends is it truly is a global IP. Mm-hmm. So we'd have to find someone that has, global reach, and YouTube won't get you into places like China. We need to go everywhere that we have players.
Okay, that's a great point. So another thing that you announced was an FPS.
Yeah.
And as somebody who's made FPSs before, I would ask why? Why FPS?
Early on, for starters, we didn't know what we were doing in R&D, and that's, that happens at every game studio. They're ready to make their second game. They're like, what should we make? We don't want to keep making sequels. We looked at the kind of games we like to play, and we tried a lot of different things. That's where the card game came from as well. But FPS is certainly up there. It's a game genre that a lot of game developers love.
True.
And so we gave it a shot.
And by the way, that was not me trying to be critical at all of the choice. When one of the challenges with any FPS is you don't see your character, right? And and League is so much about those characters.
Yeah.
But it's a great choice given that it is so far apart from the League of Legends itself. I think is a great way to extend the IP. It's
a super fun game, and that I think at the end of the day is what will carry it.
Yeah.
That players will give it a shot. Hopefully they'll try it based on the reputation, the love we've given to League, and try something different and say, oh yeah, this is fun. This is something I want to invest time in.
Well, again, as a sort of a fan of the genre, looking at the different characters you have, it is exciting to think about what their powers or their special abilities could be in an FPS.
Yeah.
It seems like, again, there are infinite possibilities for gameplay.
Yeah. And it is a shooter at the end of the day. It's not a game where you go out with your abilities and win the day. They're kind of there to put you over the edge, but It's a game about the weapons.
Well, sure. Of course, that's going to drive it mostly.
Yeah.
And I thought what was also really interesting about your announcement is that the Twitch stream was just massive, meaning there was a lot of content.
Yeah.
And versus sort of chunking it up. And did you guys talk to your fans about what the best way to announce all this was? I mean, because it was just one big blam, 5 hours of content, and here's everything we're doing versus splitting it up into multiple days or weeks of announcements. What was that decision like?
I mean, we talked about it, but again, we really thought it would have the most impact if it was all bundled together. So even if you aren't an FPS player, you're excited about the other content. Or even if you're not excited about any individual project we're doing, maybe you'll at least get excited about the commitment and Riot kind of saying, no, we're going to be here. We're not just a one-hit wonder. We have big plans, and we're going to be around for a while.
That makes sense. And so what are you doing to continue to remind players that, hey, this is coming? Are you planning on more events and if you can't say any of this, that's totally fine.
Yeah, there's nothing big on that scale planned again.
Okay.
The Legends of Runeterra, the card game, we had on just last night. Its first wave has ended. We're going to go back, make some changes based on that feedback. We'll open it up again periodically.
Okay.
And give players another chance at it, keep refining it, and then we feel like, okay, it's ready for prime time, then we'll turn it on and keep it on.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And hopefully we'll do something similar with the other games.
Great. So jumping backwards.
Yeah.
Let's talk about just you and games and how you got into it. Have you been a gamer from age zero?
I was a gamer from age zero, back, dating myself here to black and white, black and green screens or whatever, and trying to plug my TI computer into a composite, to get it on a television screen. I had an Atari 2600 and probably every console between then and now.
Okay.
I was always a gamer. I didn't, it wasn't a real career available to anyone who wasn't a programmer back in the day. And so I never really thought of it as something I could go into. I played a ton of games.
What about the game creation process drew you most to games? Was it the technical side? Was it coding? Was it art?
I can't code my way out of a bag. It was always game design, even before I knew that term existed. Like, I was a lifelong Dungeons and Dragons player. I enjoyed the world building process. I enjoyed tweaking the rules when I figured out they weren't working. I just didn't know that was a career that you could go into at the time. And as the as the industry picked up and I started to pay attention to industry events like E3 and GDC, and I think it was an interview I read with the first studio I eventually joined, Ensemble, who made Age of Empires. I read an interview with Bruce Shelley who said, hey, they were hiring new game designers, no experience necessary. And I'm like, that's me. I have no experience.
And so how did that go?
I mean, it worked. I was super, super lucky. I had a really weird background. Before I got into game design, I was an oceanographer. I have the PhD and everything. I was doing practicing real science.
Wow.
And I was a successful scientist, but not a good scientist. I didn't love it. And it's one of those industries where the rewards are super crappy. Like, the pay is low, the competition is high. The only real, and there's going to be 5 other people in the world that really understand what you're working on. It's the only real reward is for you to love it. And I looked around at my colleagues and they loved it. Like, this was their everything, to discover some new organism or to unlock some relationship between, aspects of the marine food web. And for me, it was cool, but I did not have that passion. I had that passion for video games and decided, I was going to try to make a career of it. I sent resumes to Blizzard and Origin and whoever, the big players were at the time. But it was that Ensemble interview where I saw, hey, no experience necessary. And I sent off a resume. Maybe my, way too much education caught their eye. But at the end of the day, they said, hey, this is a job to make scenarios for the single player campaign in the game. Have you ever made scenarios? And I'm, lied and said, of course, I make them all the time. My friends play them. It's great. And stayed up all night, researching all the tricks of the trades, figuring out how to make a scenario, how you script the AI, how you play balance.
Was that 98? Was that 90 or early or late 90s?
Yeah, late 90s.
So the internet wasn't really...
It was there. It was sparse.
Yeah, so
there were
that's
a couple of really good fan sites that
Okay.
had a lot of instruction for how to do that. And I kind of got lucky. They really liked the scenario I made. They flew me to Dallas for the interview, and it worked out.
That's great. Were you working directly with Bruce?
I was, yeah. I worked with Bruce, Sandy Peterson, Ian Fisher, Mark Toronto. That was a great company. I think I was employee 25 of Ensemble.
Okay.
It was a startup in every sense of the word, except the financial backing was a little more solid than most startups because it had spun off of another software company that made, quote unquote, boring software. I had in my mind, I had a card table as my first desk, and I think it had a photocopier on the side. I was in the hall somewhere next to the office admin who answered the phone, and it was amazing. This was something I loved. We would talk about the games, we would play games, we'd play test our game. Everyone there really, really wanted to be there and just loved what they were doing. And I felt like I found a home. And
so at what point did you move into becoming a lead and I think managing other people as well?
Yeah. So we worked on the Age of Empires 1 had shipped by that time. I worked on the expansion to that. I worked on Age of Empires 2. And then when it came time for the expansion to that, kind of the old guard was ready to go into R&D and try to make a new game. And they needed someone to, kind of run the franchise that was paying all the bills. And I guess I had a slightly level head. Was probably older than a lot of the people in the company at that point. And they gave me a shot running the team, managing the designers, kind of carrying the vision for what the game would be. And I kept doing that. I was at Ensemble, I think, a total of 10 years.
That's impressive. But did people call you doctor while you were there?
No. I think a lot of them didn't even know. It was weird. It was not a very hierarchical place. Like Tony Goodman ran wanted to feel like a family. So we would all just kind of had this really strong culture of playtests. One of the things I always respected about Ensemble was everyone was required to play the game, ideally every day, at least once a week. And so that was the first, that was me learning to eat your dog food then. Mm-hmm. Like you would make some awesome map or make some balance tweaks and people would play it and hate it. And you're like, okay, I learned my lesson. I'm going to do something different next time.
Was it difficult to get people to play the game?
No.
Really?
I love to play the game. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something that I imagine a lot of developers struggle with sometimes because people are busy.
People are busy, but that's when you have something good, when they're willing to put things aside. When you have to kind of tell them, hey, stop playing the game so we could fix the bugs.
Right.
That's when you know that, you're golden.
So what was the decision for you personally to maybe step away from doing the actual designs to overseeing designs? Was that difficult?
It was difficult. I was a really terrible manager at first because I had these junior designers who kind of wanted to learn the ways of the world, and I viewed them as a distraction. I had my own work to do. They'd come to the office and be like, hey, can you review this? And I'm like, no, I'm busy, go away. I've got my own stuff to do. And thank goodness we did 360 reviews at Ensemble. So I got to see the feedback, anonymous feedback from my designers who were like, Greg never has any time for me. He makes sure I understand that I'm the least important thing going on. And I was like, holy crap, I am literally, ruining their career. They came here eager to do something and they're going to kind of fail out because I don't take it seriously. And that was a huge turning point in my whole career. And I felt like, okay, job one still has to be kind of carrying the vision of the game, but job two has to be promoting their growth and giving them the feedback they need to do better, helping them understand when something wasn't working, giving them room to make mistakes and learn on their own in a safe environment. And so I went from being a horrible manager to a decent one. And once, like any company, they found someone who was willing to manage other people, you quickly get a big team.
How did you keep your design skills up to par?
The crappy answer is I worked really, really long hours. I would come in super early because game developers tend to not come in early. And I knew if I came in early, I could get a bunch of bugs knocked out, read the feedback from the night before and make a bunch of changes. I made sure to keep a couple of the aspects of the game as mine that I was not willing to hand off. For Age of Empires, it was the random maps. I designed almost every random map that shipped after the first game. And that was how I stayed in touch with both, the culture feedback and what people are saying about the game, but also random maps it was something that Age of Empires really borrowed heavily from Civilization, which Bruce had worked on. He really believed that was our avenue into the RTS space because nobody else was making random maps. So they're super hard to do right because if your little town spawns and there's no gold nearby, you're going to lose through no fault of your own. But you also don't want to be too predictable, or else why play random map at all? You just play a pre-designed map. So that was a philosophy I kept for many years. Like, I still have to own something to make sure that, again, I'm eating the dog food. I understand when our tools are bad, when the bug software isn't working, when it's hard to get a build stable, but also just to keep honing my skills as a designer. Finally gave that up on League of Legends, where I basically did nothing. But up until that point and throughout World of Warcraft, I tried really hard to keep some part of the design to myself.
Well, World of Warcraft seems very different than Age of Empires. So how did those skills that you had built up translate over to Blizzard?
So what happened with World of Warcraft basically was it launched and Ensemble shut down, like I think every game studio in the world, to play World of Warcraft. And I didn't play it at first. I played a little bit of EverQuest. I wasn't interested in another MMO, and all of my friends would not shut up about the game. Like, we'd sit down to have lunch, they would just talk about Alterac Valley or whatever. And I got so frustrated. I was like, if I'm going to go sit somewhere else, we're going to talk about this game. I'm sick of it. And they're like, no, you just got to try it. You just got to try it. I finally tried it. And it took about 10 minutes before I'm like, okay, I get it. You're right. This game's amazing. And I became a huge hardcore fan. It wasn't long before I was like sending out company-wide emails about the adventures of the company raid the night before. And at the same time, Ensemble had been acquired by Microsoft. Microsoft at the time was still, this is just around Xbox era. They're still trying to figure out how to run a game studio. And they said, basically, we need you to make Age of Empires forever. It was a great game, but after like 5 or 6 sequels, I was kind of ready for something else. We'd actually been working on an MMO internally at Ensemble. That got shut down mostly from Microsoft, I think, thinking MMOs was very expensive, they're risky. I think they were trying it in a couple other places at the time. And they're like, basically, we need you to be our RTS house. And I'm like, I get it, but I'm out. I want to go work on MMOs. I wrote, I think, to Rob Pardo because Blizzard had the best one. I was in love with World of Warcraft. And it just so happened, again, my timing is really good. I think it's easy for people to forget how much the role of luck really serves in this industry. Like, skill is a part of it, but luck is a big part of it. Blizzard was creating a new MMO that was codenamed Titan that eventually, through many phases of evolution, finally launched as Overwatch. And Jeff Kaplan, my hero, was leaving WoW to go work on that game. Tom Chilton was taking over leading World of Warcraft, and they needed someone to kind of backfill Tom's role. Tom made the classes, did a lot of PvP balance, basically made the systems. It was the first time I'd really heard a systems designer as a title. It's what I had been at Ensemble. I just didn't know that's what it was called. Blizzard needed a new systems designer with managerial experience. I had that, so the timing was just perfect. I got there and they said, hey, we just went to BlizzCon and announced the Death Knight, but no one actually has time to build this class. So could you build this class for us?
Oh, what a great first opportunity. Wow.
It was great and horrible because I had not had time to like learn the tools or what they were capable of. So all of my crazy ideas were like impossible to implement or buggy or broke the game engine. But maybe because of that, it became a really fun class, I think, because I didn't know our own limits.
Now, I remember when that came out, it was one of the first times I kind of reawakened my interest in World of Warcraft, because I was a huge fan too and played stupid amounts of the game. So when you were at Blizzard, you ended up running a large design team as well, right?
Yeah, I don't know how many people it was, 30 or 40. It was basically, we split design in half. There was what we called the content design, which was quests and levels. And then there was systems design, which is everything else. So classes, items, the rules for things like the economy, the UI, PvP, eventually achievements, random ass features like Dungeon Finder, Transmog, all of that stuff kind of fell within our team.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot. It was, Blizzard has such great developers. The engineers were top notch. So like any good engineer, when you would go to them with your crazy ass idea, they would never say no. They would say, okay, this is how we'd have to make it work. These are the trade-offs. And so it was a really good symbiotic relationship like you're supposed to have between designer and engineer. We'd build on each other's stuff. And, we launched almost everything we came up with. There were a few things that didn't work or we put in the closet, but it felt very empowering as a designer because when you had an idea, they could usually bring it to life.
So what were some of the lessons that you brought to Riot from your time at Blizzard?
The culture playtest was a big one. WoW was a hard game to playtest. You can't like say, hey, here's a new zone, go level up. But I got us to pretty regularly go through all the dungeons and test out changes in PvP. You couldn't really get good balance information from those playtests, but you could get what at Riot we would call like feels or satisfaction of like, hey, I'd used this ability, it felt kind of puny compared to my expectations, or I went up against this guy and felt like I had no options. So I think the culture playtest, the big one for me, and I think one of the biggest like threads throughout my career was listening to players. Early on at Ensemble, because I didn't know what I was doing, we were stuck on civilization bonuses for one of the civs. And there was this big debate of, was it too weak or too powerful? And I said, well, let's just go ask the players what they think, which was a super novel idea at the time. I think it felt to a lot of my team like you're kind of admitting that you don't really know what you're doing if you go to the players and say, hey, we're not sure. What do you think? There was this idea that you have to kind of keep inside this almost ivory academic tower. At the time in World of Warcraft, you knew what the developers were thinking when the patch notes came out. And there was almost no communication up until that point. And that was really their style. And that Blizzard was all about polish and refinement. So by the time they pushed out a patch note, they were pretty confident it was going to solve the problem. And I felt like, we're missing a step or being less efficient. And even if we do manage to solve the problem correctly, bringing players along in that journey carries a lot of value, because a lot of times, you're asking them to be patient. Like, hey, we don't know how to fix your shaman, but we have some ideas. Give us a few patches and we'll get there. Or, I know this seems really confusing. You don't understand why we made these changes. Let me show you our journey so maybe you have some context. And then even if the players didn't agree with the changes, they would understand our goals. And even if we screwed up and made a bad patch note, they would hopefully understand that we were trying to do the right thing and just kind of the goals were right and we just tactically fumbled the specific implementation. So that was a real novelty for Blizzard at the time. And it did, I bumped into some policies. I got sharp elbows on occasion trying to have this two-way interaction with players. And I'm quick to point out it was English-speaking players because I couldn't talk to the players in Korea or France or anything. But it was great. I felt like we got a lot of good feedback. The Death Knight that we were talking about earlier, I think partially got created through that cycle of asking players what they thought, getting their feedback, saying, hey, let us know what parts aren't working. Are there bugs we missed? There's a lot of risk to that, obviously. You don't want to set the expectation that you're co-developing anything, right? At the end of the day, they're paying you to do a thing and you should be good at your job. It also can be a huge bandwidth drain. Like, players are never satisfied with your answer. They always have additional questions. It's easy to spend all day on Reddit or on a forum just going back and forth. And again, not getting your actual work done. But I still thought it really paid off.
And that was being done here to some degree, right? I mean, Riot has been big in terms of saying players first and, right? I mean,
yeah,
when
absolutely.
you joined,
and the end of the story is I saw this company out here that like put that, on the wall of the studio of like, we listen to players, we care about players, we want to have that relationship.
Yeah.
And to Blizzard's credit, they've gotten there a little bit since I've left, but at the time it was not their policy. I was kind of bumping into that.
Right.
And I thought, hey, maybe I should be somewhere that embraces it and celebrates that.
So are players ever wrong?
Oh, all the time. But a lot of it's about the attitude you take when they're wrong. Nobody likes being told, yeah, you're wrong, or you're stupid is even worse. So I always try to approach that conversation with, hey, I understand what you're trying to say. I'm empathetic to the problem you're trying to solve. I understand you may be frustrated. Here's the problem with your suggestion. Maybe there's a tweak to it that would actually work.
What's the most high profile, say, argument you have had with players?
Oh gosh, there's so many of them. I mean, wow, I'd have to go back a while. There was a time, I think it was Lich King, where a change we'd made to the Retribution Paladin made them completely overpowered. And I was on vacation at the time when we nerfed the abilities. And players who'd been used to this like conversation suddenly felt shut off. And they're like, why aren't you answering our questions? What's going on?
Just because you're on vacation?
Just because I was on vacation, which is another risk, is like when you have that steady drip and it gets turned off, they interpreted it as like, oh, something's wrong, or he's embarrassed, or he, or they finally silenced him or something like that. It was just on vacation. And then they, some players never forgave us for making that change. It was crazy.
Did you ever say even it out after that change and getting the feedback from players?
I mean, the change was ultimately, I think, the right thing to do, but they didn't have the context. They just saw the patch notes slam down on them. They didn't understand. It's often hard for players in a game like WoW, when they really are focused on their one character, they don't necessarily understand what the experience is like for everyone else. They're like, hey, I'm having fun. This seems cool. What's wrong? They don't realize they're kind of steamrolling past everyone else.
Do you think the attitude of players towards, say, design changes has changed over the years? Are players more sophisticated now? Do they understand more of the reasoning that goes into these changes?
Oh, I think they're definitely more sophisticated. I think we have, talked a lot about, the industry has talked a lot about what game development is like and what our goals are. And, people can go watch the GDC talks and see the mindset that goes into particular changes. Let alone a lot of games now just like ship their tools. Anyone, maybe not anyone, but it's fairly easy to pick up something even as complicated as Unity or Unreal and kind of make a game. And a lot of other games, there's Roblox and there's Minecraft. And there's a lot of systems out there that that kind of give players that tool set. And so then they also have the mindset of like, oh, I understand a little bit more about what game development is, certainly more than I did when I was first, discovered there's a whole industry out there.
So here at Riot, is it difficult sometimes to get designers to understand what the players are saying, or even have them agree that there is a problem?
Oh yeah, I mean, sometimes there's not a problem. The players perceive there is, but we don't think there is.
Okay.
Convincing them that is tricky because the players will kind of get in this mindset of, we'll prove it. Like, show us your data. And even if we show the data, they're like, well, your data's wrong because of X, Y, Z. And again, you don't want to kind of get into this lawyerly conversation where if the players say the right thing, they force you to make a change that you think is wrong. Again, it can be hard to get the voice of every player out there. We think of ourselves as a global studio, but our headquarters is in Los Angeles, and most of the designers, at least half the designers, are English as a first language. So it can be difficult when a player in Turkey or Vietnam is like, hey, I see a problem. That word will usually get to Riot because we have all of these offices around the world, but it may not get to the designer who made the change.
That's a lot of responsibility.
Oh man, yeah, it is. It is.
I mean, it's difficult as if you're making just a tweak and knowing that there are millions of people around the world who may react to this tweak is heavy. But
the opposite side of that is there may be millions of players around the world waiting for you to fix this bug or make this change. Yeah. And if you hold that back out of fear, you're kind of not holding up your end of the bargain on that either.
So with that in mind, how would you describe sort of the optimal designer for League of Legends? What kind of qualities do you look for?
It depends a little on what aspect of the game they're working on, but overall, League of Legends is mostly systems designers, right? We're making new abilities for champions, we're making new tweaks to the matchmaking protocol, we're designing new game modes like Teamfight Tactics. Having a really open mind is helpful. We like to call it as like strong convictions loosely held. Like, you need to be able to justify why you're making a particular decision, but you also need to be willing to change your mind in the face of evidence to the contrary.
That is such a great quote.
Yeah, because the opposite extremes of that never work. If someone is willing to kind of change their mind on a dime, it means they probably didn't put the kind of intellectual rigor into the decision in the first place.
Yeah.
And if they're being stubborn about it, well, probably something else is going on. They're too close to it, or for whatever reason, if they're not willing to like see the data or see the player reaction to your thing, then you're probably not making decisions with the player in mind. You're making it for some other reason.
So now that you're overseeing both narrative and design, what's different about that than previously when you were overseeing teams of just designers?
Even though I said I started out life as a dungeon master, I had not done a ton of world building in a while. On World of Warcraft, the other half of the designers are doing almost all of that work. It's something I missed, frankly. It was how I first got into the industry. And so it has been fun to rediscover that, the creative sense, the feeling that you can do anything and change the world and tell stories people haven't seen before.
Do you have people do you have two teams, or is it one team where people are wearing multiple hats in terms of narrative and design?
I do almost no game design anymore. I've handed that off almost completely to other people. I still call myself a game designer because that's my background, and I don't want to think that I'm a producer or something like that. So it's a team. We have a creative team. It's a lot of artists and writers and musicians and just people with good ideas.
And so they get together and work on the stories together?
Yeah. I mean, we do a lot of
the characters.
Yeah, backstories is certainly one of the things we do. We have a lot of products aside from. So backing up a bit, I think of our job as kind of twofold. One is overall, we want to make this great IP, and there's kind of two ways to do that. One is to make sure that the IP expressed through the games is as good as it can be, because at least for today, the way we're going to hit the most players is through our games, right? We have 100-something million players in League of Legends. Hopefully the other games will be big as well. So other expressions of the IP are just not going to have that audience. But at the same time, they're competitive, for the most part, multiplayer games. Those are not great venues for storytelling. It kind of gets in the way when a talking head comes up when you're just trying to kill some dude. So we have to do, by necessity, a lot of the storytelling outside of the games as well. So that's where we rely on things like comic books and board games and music videos and more conventional videos and manga and anime and novels and all that kind of stuff that are not the games themselves, but are other ways people can experience the IP. And then ultimately TV shows.
Okay. And so has the team grown since now you are branching out into these other ways of telling the League story?
We've grown a little bit, mostly trying to get the right skill sets in there. Like if we do more cinematics, we need folks with good cinematic direction experience.
Okay.
The more music we do, we need people who are good at artist relations, because we do some music in-house, but we also partner with a lot of artists out there as well. So we look for the specific skills we're lacking and try to build up there.
So back on design for a second.
Yeah.
How many designers are on your team are you overseeing?
On my particular team, very few, like 3 or 4.
Well, I guess, but
Yeah.
you sit atop pretty much all design, right? So how many designers?
Technically,
are
no.
there?
If you really want to get to the guts of the organization of Riot Games, Tom Cadwell is still the VP of game design, and all the designers ultimately kind of report up to him.
Okay.
I was in that organization. I've kind of stepped aside and taken on the more creative sides of things, art and narrative.
Okay. But I still am interested in the design culture, though, because I think that a lot of us who have development teams talk about what is design culture and how do we ensure that the lessons that we're learning and the mistakes we're making are actually shared consistently.
Yeah.
And you have a giant team. So how do you do that?
Another skill that's really, really important for designers is communication. Both, like we said, to be able to communicate with players, but also to communicate with engineers and get them to understand what we're trying to build. And also just to be able to talk to other designers, get them to understand, hey, I tried that once before. Mm-hmm. Here are the problems I ran into. Maybe you won't run into those problems because of X, Y, or Z, but that shared, the tribal knowledge you have from having worked on a thing is really, really valuable to try to instill in the associate and more junior designers kind of as quickly as possible to get them up to the point where they're making good decisions.
Well, this is a really tactical question, but with that, how do you get that institutional knowledge conveyed quickly and consistently?
I mean, we do a lot of different things. At a super high level, we have weekly design meetings for the company where someone makes a presentation on, hey, I played a game and here's some lessons we can learn from that game. Not a Riot game, another awesome game that just came out. Or, hey, I tried this thing when I was making a champion, or I tried this thing when I was making a new matchmaking system, and here's some of the problems I ran into. So that's kind of at the educational level.
And so, but this is groups of designers who are getting together.
This is the whole company. This is every designer at Riot, which
and
is several hundred at this point.
Do you broadcast that out across the various groups?
We invite, I think, pretty much anyone who wants to come sit in the room can come, or to watch the stream, or kind of building up, I guess, our own GDC vault that way.
How often do you do that?
Weekly. And
really? Often
we'll do more than one talk a week because we found that, some people can carry a room for 40 minutes, but if you haven't been at the company that long, you may not have that much to talk about. So we'll let the more junior designers do kind of a lightning talk round where they may only have 5 slides, and they'll say like, hey, here's a cool game I played. Here's one take-home message from it that may be worth exploring in a future idea.
That's really cool. Is it a scheduled thing, or can you just volunteer to make a talk whenever you want?
It's a scheduled thing, but there's always holes in the schedule. And if you have a good idea, you can usually get on there pretty quickly. Or maybe there was, someone had to cancel, so there's a hole in the schedule you can jump into, that kind of thing.
I love it.
Yeah, it's great. It helps you to feel part of the broader community. It helps the folks who are on the R&D titles still have that connection to League of Legends and vice versa.
Right. That is unique. So So diving a little bit into maybe the industry, our industry has run into some interesting cultural issues lately. I think this year we've been out there, for better or for worse, with various controversies.
Yeah.
And what do you think we're getting better or worse at recognizing when we're not acting responsibly as an industry?
I think we're getting better. I want to think we're getting better. I think people are quicker to call us on it than they used to be. I think for a long time, we could lean on the argument of like, hey, we're new at this. We don't know what we're doing. Yeah, I know the tech industry made a bunch of mistakes. We haven't had time to make those mistakes yet. But I think that excuse is starting to wear thin, and now we should be more responsible.
Is that generated conversations within Riot?
Oh, Lord, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Haven't you? Yeah. Anyone who's read the news about Riot the past few years. Yeah. Riot felt very much like a startup, even when I joined here. And one of the cool things is I've been able to see its evolution from kind of startup to sustainable business that has to worry about long-term things like, what is our reputation? What is our culture? What do we want Rioters to be? And what kind of values do we want them to hold?
Do you guys talk about responsible design?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
How would you define that?
As a designer, you're really kind of holding on to the player experience. And you can lead players into a lot of like bad experiences if you want to. It's very easy to manipulate players if you're not careful and you're not responsible.
How do you know if you're doing that?
It could be hard. I think you have to look at their motivation overall. If players are having fun in the moment, you're probably in a good place. If they're not having fun in the moment and they're really focused on long-term rewards, then you may be like manipulating them into doing things they're not enjoying for the promise of a reward. The easiest thing to...
Aren't you talking about most MMOs?
I'm talking about every video game nowadays.
Joking,
yeah. Everything has rewards now. And they could be pretty innocent rewards like a cool new gun, or they could be, cosmetic rewards or things you open up card packs to achieve, or rare chase items and loot boxes or things like that.
Yeah.
And if players aren't having fun, they're so focused on that item. Like going back to World of Warcraft, it was certainly a loot-driven game, but we tried to make sure players were having fun in the moment. Maybe not every single second, because it's a video game and there may be frustrating moments. But overall, they should be enjoying the raid. They should be enjoying the PvP battleground. They should be enjoying the quests, not just looking forward to that next cool item. Items should just be like frosting.
I remember Blizzard consistently making an effort to make it less grindy.
Yeah.
It seemed like most of the expansions that were released addressed the issues of grinding.
Yeah, I think grind is the definition I would use is you're not focused on the second to second gameplay. You're not having fun.
Right.
You're just looking forward to that thing at the end. It's like maybe you don't enjoy your job, but you enjoy your weekend or your vacations. That's kind of not why we want people to play games.
Yeah, I mean, I recall it feeling a lot like work for the first few years.
If your game is feeling like work, you're probably not, it's probably not the player experience you're going for.
Well, on the other hand, I think at the beginning, it was also really fresh too. I mean, yes, there have been EverQuests, but World of Warcraft did a lot of things that were unique.
Yeah.
And it's still, and it continued to expand. I mean, the amount of content that was getting added was continued to be compelling. So it was just better and better.
It still is to this day.
Yeah. And they really have, I mean, to Blizzard's credit, have made an incredible effort to make the experience more broad so that more and more people who are who are casual gamers can get in and have fun regardless.
Yeah, I remember this moment between, I think it was right after Wrath of the Lich King, where we kind of sat down and said, what kind of game do we want to make? We could make a game where each expansion, each sequel just takes the top of the funnel and cuts the rest of the players away. And we keep making content for this very exclusive group, who I'm sure would be thrilled to have it. But you're basically telling a lot of players, hey, this isn't for you.
Yeah.
And we decided not to do that. We went the opposite route of, hey, every expansion will be a time to return to the game, a time when you can catch up, or if you've taken a break from WoW, now's the time to come back.
Well, I mean, coming back to Riot, that seems to be something that you're doing now with the massive expansion of the IP. I mean, you're providing a lot of different entrees for different players.
Yeah.
Who may not have ever played League of Legends, but they're FPS players, or maybe they love card games.
No, that's exactly it. And even with League itself, we try to have a game that is easy to pick up again if you've put it down. We want a game that people can keep coming back to. So if you've taken a break, God forbid another great game came along that you wanted to play, we don't want to tell players, don't you dare.
Don't step away. Or
don't step away or we'll punish you for it, like a frequent flyer system or something. We want them to be able to put the game down, go have fun, but then know that we'll be waiting for them to come back.
Yeah.
And now that we're going to have this broader ecosystem, we're not going to view it as a bad thing if someone quits League of Legends to play Legends of Runeterra or something like that.
That's great.
Yeah.
So looking ahead, right, next year, we know that actually this year and next year, there are a lot of big changes that are coming our way for the industry, at least on the console and streaming side, cloud streaming side.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about what that means, if anything, to Riot.
Oh, it's huge for Riot. We, even a few years ago, we would have said, hey, we don't only make games on a particular platform or particular business model, but we really had a PC game.
Mm-hmm.
And the industry, console is going stronger than ever, and mobile now, where I think a lot of us used to view as a platform for kind of like simple games that your mother might play, now is a legitimate gaming platform. And players are saying, I'm a PC player, I'll play on my PC whenever I can, but I may be on the bus or I may be standing in line at McDonald's or something. I need something I can play then. And so mobile is, while some players may hate to hear it, is a pretty legit platform these days.
Oh, yeah. I mean, actually, I'm really excited to see I was very excited to see the announcements you made about bringing your IP to mobile. That's huge.
It's scary, I think, for a lot of particularly Western players who view mobile as a threat. But when you, spend some time in a place like China, you realize it's done, and it is now a mobile-first ecosystem.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the trick is not to have a platform rivalry, but to say we can have deep experiences on any platform, rather than the fear that, if mobile games are casual, does that someday mean all games have to be casual? And I don't view it that way at all.
No, and I think there are a bunch of games out there that are proving the opposite right now.
Yeah.
There are plenty of games that you could consider deep, somewhat hardcore, that are on mobile, and the developers have figured out how to use very different controls to make them still make them accessible, which is brutally, really hard.
So I think that's exciting. I think the future for that is going to be great because there will be games in so many different places to go to play.
Do you think the audiences are going to change? I mean, again, I'm thinking more about cloud gaming and what that could mean for players. Do you think that we'll see players that we haven't seen before, or is it more of the same?
I hope we see players that we haven't seen before. League, like kind of WoW before it, both games did a fairly decent job of capturing the female audience, but could still be a lot better. It's not yet 50-50. It's a lot closer to 50-50 on a lot of mobile games. Similarly, both on WoW and League, we kind of saw our player base start to age over time. We weren't bringing in younger players as well. And so I think that's a great opportunity. And you see the Fortnites and the Minecrafts of the world are a great jumping on point for younger players.
Since you brought up age, just as somebody who is also maybe in the second half of one's career.
I hate that thought. Jeez.
What do you find that it's easy to identify with folks who are, say, 25 years younger than you, who are entering the industry, or not?
I actually do. I always feel, I think, much younger than I am. I always really, I don't know, I can connect to that. I remember so clearly what it was like walking in the door for the first time and being shown, hey, here's the tool set we use, and here's how we think about playtest and vacation and things like that. It's so fresh in my mind. And I think I'm used to talking to players who are often much younger than I am. And so it's a little easier to stay connected that way.
What a great perspective. And it's probably something that a lot of us don't do enough, is talk to players or get on Reddit and just read the comments and just see what people are really saying versus relying on one's own small team to tell you.
I mean, I think it's a combination of those. I would dump it in kind of like three buckets. One is you do have your own personal intuition and judgment, or else why are you doing this job if you can't make a good decision, absent any other information? But then there's also tons and tons of data. We can grab a lot of data about what players are doing. They're saying they're enjoying this, but do the hours back that up? And then talking to them and getting their perspective. They may say, yeah, I'm putting a lot of hours into that, but I'm not enjoying it. Yeah. Or I would enjoy it more if you did this thing, or here's why I love the game, or here's the problem I think with this one character that I hope you eventually fix. So I think if you can lean on all three of those tool sets, the hardcore data, the player experience, then kind of your own personal judgment, that over the course of time, you'll make more good decisions than bad.
Well, that's fantastic advice for any designer, right? No, I mean, if anybody takes anything away from this, they should be replaying that sentence.
Yeah. I mean, data's not scary. Data could be used poorly if you make every decision based on what the data says, without really understanding it. I am fine with people on my team making a decision that is not backed up by the data,
right,
as long as they're doing that objectively. And they're saying, hey, we know the data doesn't support this. We're willing to take a risk in this decision for these specific reasons,
right,
but we acknowledge it's a risk. And maybe that means you don't take a risk in every decision.
Well, it sounds like, I mean, you're advocating a balance,
yeah,
right? It's look at all angles,
yeah,
and then make the right, fully informed decision.
Yeah.
Instead of just, hair on fire.
Yeah.
Press a button.
But that's true. You don't always have the luxury. Sometimes you do have to make a really, hey, the servers are down. How do we get them back up? Or do we take the servers down because of some horrible bug? You don't always have the luxury of fully exploring the options, but there are a lot of times you do.
So one final question. As somebody who has more experience than probably most designers in this industry, what advice would you give to somebody who has been thinking about, say, making a change from being a marine biologist to a designer, or any career?
Sure.
To becoming a designer in our industry?
I think there's still a misperception for a lot of people that haven't done it before about what design is. They think it is sitting in an office, coming up with ideas, then kind of sending an email to an engineer saying, hey, make this, now make this, now make this. It's a super collaborative project. And a lot of times when I'm speaking to young people in high schools or college, and I say, hey, those group activities you have to do sometime? If you hate that, you will probably hate software development, because a lot of it is getting people to agree with your idea, working with people who you may struggle sometimes to communicate with, sometimes giving into an argument that you feel deep in your heart you're probably right, but you think it's the right thing to do to let them win one once in a while. All of those human skills are super important in an industry that I think tends to attract a lot of people that maybe lack the human skills and are very good on the technical side of things.
That is excellent advice.
It's a great career. I'm super grateful for what I've been able to do. And God, I hate to think of it as being halfway over already, but
I wasn't implying it was halfway over. Just like we're in that second, phase of careers.
But I'd encourage anyone to give it a shot. Again, there are a lot of tools out there people can use now that never existed before. Pay attention to what developers say when you hear interviews, or you see a GDC or talk or something like that, to ask yourself, what is it they're really doing? What is the day-to-day job like? Because precious little of it is, hey, I'm going to make up a new character today. Whenever anyone gives me their game pitch and they immediately jump to here's the world and here's the setting and here's the abilities, I'm like, whoa, you're going to back up. Let's talk at the high level. What is the experience you want the players to have? How long is the game supposed to be? Is it a single player game or a multiplayer game? What platforms are you thinking of? Start at that really basic level. Mm-hmm. And if you can get through those questions, someday you'll be able to start getting into the really juicy stuff of what kind of weapons are in the game and that kind of thing.
Got it. So if people have more questions for you, how can they get in touch with you?
The easiest way is through Twitter. I'm at Ghostcrawler. I try to respond to a bunch. I try to answer questions that players have about League, about Riot, even about WoW if I'm not stepping on toes, or anything about the industry. I get energized talking to players, so it's never an imposition.
Great. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks. It was fun.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.